Hi everyone, it's just a quick video to update you on your introduction drafts. I just want to give you something that you can look at and to try and understand the comments I've made and the marking that I've given back to you. I know it's difficult to read it off the screen, so hopefully this will help you a little bit in understanding what exactly needs to be changed. Usually they're only very, very minor changes, but unfortunately they do make a big difference. So I've tried to pick out a few things that will make a big difference, but I'll keep it short. Right, so firstly, if we look at the theory at the very beginning of this, it's really important, as you're doing Loftus and Palmer, that you explain clearly the issue of reconstructive memory. That within that you discuss the idea of the misinformation effect, which, if you remember, is a combination of factors such as leading questions, which is very, very relevant to Loftus and Palmer, so that should be included, but also post-event discussion. Now, you don't need to mention post-event discussion because that's not really what Loftus and Palmer are looking at. So when discussing reconstructive memory, you need to give a definition of what that is, and you need to explain the problem of leading questions in how that will change a person's memory of an event. Then you can discuss schema theory, but that's not the major part of this. The big issue here is reconstructive memory and leading questions. Those things need to be explained in detail, and then perhaps something mentioned about the role of schema in reconstructive memory as well. Because if you ask someone what speed was the car travelling when it smashed, as we know, we have a clear idea of what we think smashed means, and that's going to influence our memory of an event, of the car crash. So yes, schema is relevant. That should go in there. But the major theory of this is the idea of leading questions as part of reconstructive memory. Just to add to that then, reconstructive memory and the issue of leading questions should be the focus of your theory section. So if you can see that you've mostly written about schema theory, maybe you need to go back and make sure there is more on reconstructive memory and leading questions and what that means. How does that influence a person's memory of an event? Okay, then when you're discussing the experiment itself, I think the procedure and the findings is fairly straightforward. Do give the findings of the verbs that you are going to use in your own experiment. So if you're the percentages for those verbs that you are using. Once you've done that, the bit that some of you are missing is to just be very, very clear about what they concluded from those findings. So you need to link Loftus and Palmer's experiment to the theory that you've discussed. So in other words, they've found that the smashed verb produced the highest estimated speed. So how does that link then to the idea of reconstructive memory leading questions? That might only be a sentence or two, but you need to give a very clear sentence. In other words, so it needs to read something like, therefore Loftus and Palmer concluded, and then whatever that may be. So then you discuss again that idea of the effect that leading questions have. Okay, so there we go. There's a suggestion of what you might use. You don't have to use that, and obviously it's preferable if you put it into your own words, but there does need to be a very, very clear conclusion at the end of your discussion of what Loftus and Palmer did. Okay, moving on. When you get to the aim, here you need to be clear about how your experiment, so forget Loftus and Palmer for a minute, how does your experiment link to the theory of leading questions and reconstructive memory? So once you get to where you're discussing your aim, you need to give a sentence or two as to how you are going to find evidence of the effect of leading questions. That's it. So again, it might look something like that. So to test the theory of reconstructed memory, the aim of our experiment is, and then you obviously talk about how you're going to find a higher speed depending on the question that's asked. Okay, then when you're looking at the part about the importance of this experiment, a lot of you have mentioned about how it affects the criminal justice system. That's good, but also it needs to really focus on the participants. So in other words, why are you doing this experiment with the group of participants that you are using? Now, Loftus and Palmer have used a group of participants in America in the 1970s. Now, why then is it helpful for you to use a group of participants in a school in England? Okay, so you should be talking there about issues of reliability, about cultural differences, for example. Do we expect to find the same thing despite the cultural differences? There needs to be a reason why you're doing this. Why are you doing this with the participants that you have chosen? What do you hope to find from your study? And then finally, when you get onto the hypotheses at the end, there obviously should be two, the null and the research. Make sure these are operationalized, okay? I forgot to mention when talking about the aim, but that should be in there as well. When you're discussing the aim of your experiment, that too should be operationalized. So whatever your independent and dependent variables are, how are you measuring them? In the hypothesis, you also need to say how you're measuring these things. So how are you measuring speed? How are you measuring the leading questions? How are you measuring the verbs? So just specify which verbs you're using. In the research hypothesis, this is where you should be saying what you expect to find. So what difference do you expect to see? The null hypothesis is that there will be no difference. Research hypothesis, what difference do you expect? And obviously we know what difference we expect because we're basing this on Loftus and Palmer's findings as well. I hope that helps. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible because I don't want to overload you with more information. But really the key things to pick up on from this are that you've given a clear conclusion of Loftus and Palmer's experiment. You've linked the theory of reconstructive memory to your own experiment in your aim. So what do you expect to find in relation to leading questions? And that you have another look at your hypotheses as well to make sure that you've operationalized both the DV and the IV. Finally, just go back and look at the theory as I mentioned at the beginning. Please make sure that you have explained what reconstructive memory is and that you've explained the role of leading questions in reconstructive memory. If you've done all of that, then you are good to go. If you're unsure still of anything, I have uploaded the checklist for the introduction on the assignment. So where you've got the IA draft assignment in Teams, you'll see that there's a PowerPoint that gives you a checklist of exactly what needs to be in there. Really, most of you is just making some minor tweaks. That's all. If you've got any more questions, please let me know. Send me a message on Teams. Thank you all.